On this episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast, I'm talking to Bill Price from howtolanguages.com, and I also give the details of the Actual Fluency June giveaway.
Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast, the podcast that gives you the tools and inspiration to learn languages faster and more efficiently. And now your host, Chris Broholm.
All right, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. As always, I'm Chris Broholm, and I'm so excited today because summer is here. It's a great weather in Denmark, and in less than 2 weeks, I'll be in Berlin talking to a ton of other polyglots and just hanging out and having fun and hopefully learning a lot of things by, at all these talks that they have at the conference. I'm actually going to be speaking myself. I'm going to be doing an introductory Danish talk. So if you're at the Polyglot Conference in Berlin and you want to know a little bit about Danish, I encourage you to stop by my talk, and you can find the time in the program, which you'll get when you arrive. So I'm super stoked for that. Some other things that are going on right now. I just published a post recently about a June giveaway, and it's also my 3-month status update for Russian. And I can just give you guys the little details here. Actually, maybe I should step back a bit. Maybe this is the first time you're hearing my voice. Maybe you don't know what the podcast is, who I am. So let me just step back a bit and tell you that my name is Chris Broholm. I'm from Denmark. I speak Danish, English, and German fairly fluently, at least 2 of them very fluently. And I'm studying Russian as my first foreign language. At university, I'm currently doing a BA in English, and of course that is very fitting with language learning. And other than that, I'm writing on my blog, Actual Fluency, doing this podcast, and basically the format of the podcast, in case you're wondering, is that I bring the stories of fellow language learners, and some of them you might have heard of, and some of them you definitely haven't heard of. And it's not because I don't want to bring on, the Benny Lewises every week. Of course, I'm going to get Benny Lewis on one day, and it's kind of like a running gag by now. But he is going to be in Berlin, and I'm going to try and persuade him. I'm going to buy him a drink or an ice cream or something and sit down and do the interview with me. So it'll come. Have patience. But the problem with these sort of say A-list polyglots is that they're usually very busy. I've been so blessed and fortunate to have amazing polyglots such as Steve Kaufman, Dave Mansouri, and Judith Meyer on the show already. But having that quality of people every single week for a weekly show, it's just not possible. Let me be honest with you. It's not possible. So I knew from the get-go that wasn't a feasible format. So what I thought up instead was, well, let's ignore how, say, well-known people are, and let's just go to the kind of the core of the subject, the language learning, because no matter what your name is and how many people have heard of you, you still have a great story to share. And through all these interviews so far, this is episode 12, one was a double episode and one was with me, so let's say 10 people I interviewed. They all bring something to the table, and they all have their unique twists and turns to language learning that makes it all incredibly viable, even though you might not have heard about them before. And to round it all off, most of them also have blogs or YouTube channels where they go into greater detail. So there's more of their material available. It's not just the interview. And it's also for my own sake because, I started the blog this year. And this whole language learning individually is something that I only just got into. So for me, it's a journey, and the podcast is an opportunity to ask these knowledgeable people who have been through the whole thing, maybe done it for years and years. And I can sit here and I can ask them, well, how do you do that? And how do you combat this? And yeah, admittedly, the topics are kind of similar, but everyone has their own opinion. You can ask one person, he does it one way, ask another person, and he would never do it that way. So I hope that you enjoy this variety of opinions on language learning, because at the end of the day, this is a subject that is very personal, and you need to find your own way that works. And if you want to read how I've been doing in Russian, you should check out actualfluency.com, and you can, on the top of the page, there's a read all my Russian posts. And it's not because I've written anything in Russian. I struggle to, write even the basic sentences in Russian, but it's about how I'm learning and how I'm adjusting my goals and motivation along the way. But enough of that. If you want to, what I'm doing is I like to give things away. It's a nice feeling. It's a good feeling. And last time I gave away a free book, which was an interlinear book. It had let's say it's the Russian book. They had the Russian and then the English below, so you could easily read in Russian. A great book, and they have a few different languages. And before that, I gave away a free copy of Benny Lewis's Fluent in 3 Months because I really liked the book and I did a very extensive review on it, and I wanted people to read the book as well. So I gave that one away. Now it's time to give more stuff away. And this time, I thought about giving away another book, but instead I'm just going to let people choose what they want. So I'm giving away Amazon gift certificates so people can buy whatever they want. And in addition to that, I've been very fortunate to partner up with Antosh and Lynn flashcard services. And you might already know these from something like Russian-flashcards.com, Spanish flashcards. They have a wide variety of sites, and he has been very generous to offer up a number of free premium months for people in this giveaway. So what do you have to do to join this giveaway and win the prizes? Well, you can read all the details on actualfluency.com/June giveaway, but I will tell you now that all you need to do is go to actualfluency.com/iTunes and simply leave a review. That will give you free tickets for the event. So it's a draw. You get free 5 tickets for putting in a review on iTunes, and an honest review, please. And you can get one more additional ticket, or your only ticket if you don't have iTunes or a way to leave a review, is if you retweet the message that is on actualfluency.com/June giveaway in one word. So that's all I have now. And now it's time for the interview segment with Bill Price. Welcome to all the listeners that are joining in now, and today I'm joined by Bill Price, an American citizen of Colorado, and Bill's been writing on the blog howtolanguages.com, very fitting name, and on the blog we followed him and his wife initially learning German, and now he's branching into a ton of other languages. And Bill, I don't know if you want to add a little bit to that, maybe tell the listeners how you got started with the language learning. Post your high school, I assume, is your first foreign language introduction.
Well, actually, Chris, I was raised in Louisiana with French, so I took French basically from kindergarten up through high school. So I got about 13 years of French. Plus, a lot of my friends spoke French. It was very immersive back then. So I spoke pretty fluent French from childhood. So that one's kind of come with me. I never really thought about that, though, as, learning a foreign language, because it was so natural, and I almost kind of consider it to be a second native language. My first real foray into language learning independently really was about 2.5 years ago when I started the blog. My wife and I decided to learn German together, and that was really kind of the beginning of this journey that I've kind of never let go of. I did use Spanish quite a bit prior to that in my job, just in day-to-day. I was a restaurant manager for a long time, and a lot of my employees were Spanish speaking. So I did pick up quite a bit of Spanish before that, but again, I never really considered that to be language learning. It was just kind of part of the job, part of what we did. And so I'm pretty reasonable in Spanish as well.
And maybe just take a little second to explain the Louisiana, because I know that there's a heavy French influence, but I didn't actually know that there was still a lot of French spoken there. How is that today?
Well, surprisingly, there is a ton of French still spoken in Louisiana. In fact, it's the second most spoken language in Louisiana. Most states, it's Spanish. I'd say like 50, 46 or 45 or 46 of the other states, Spanish is the number one language. But in Louisiana, it still has a very heavy French influence. A lot of the older generations still speak exclusively French at home. So you see a lot of even kids nowadays who do speak French because they speak it to, their grandparents or their great grandparents when they go over to their house and that kind of thing. So you do see a lot of French, but it's not French. It's not Parisian French. It's much more of a Creole, a Cajun French, which is primarily what I speak. I got a lot of education in school to speak proper French as well. But when I'm just speaking casually, I tend to move more into a Cajun French, which actually it's probably about 70% French and maybe 10 or 15% Spanish, oddly enough. And then the rest kind of English cognates thrown in. I think a lot of that probably stemmed from new words that developed over time that they didn't really have a source for, so they just kind of used the English or the Spanish for. But it's a very interesting, if you only speak Parisian French, it's very interesting to go down there and listen to them.
Do they
talk.
understand it? If you come from Paris, do you understand what they're saying, or do you need a little bit of adjusting or asking them to be a little bit more standard?
I think it's pretty easy to understand. It'd be kind of the equivalent of going to Quebec, and listening to Quebecer French. It takes some adjusting. There's some vocabulary difference, and the accent may take some time to get used to. But overall, I don't think there'd be too much difficulty, really any difficulty, communicating.
Right. So kind of like Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian, maybe almost. If you're familiar with this.
I could kind of see that just from what you've described. Absolutely.
Cool. And how did you feel about this? Everybody's talking about immersion these days. That's the way to do it. And, obviously Benny Lewis has a big say in that because he's been the most prolific one, but he's kind of saying you should just throw yourself in there. But can you see from when you were younger, can you see the effectiveness of that way of learning languages? And are you doing anything today that kind of resembles that way you used to learn French?
Well, I absolutely can see the benefit, and it did absolutely help because as a child, your goal is to, have friends and communicate with your friends.
Oops, I just lost you, Bill. Can you hear me? Just trying to get him back. Oops. Hello?
Did I lose you?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just lost connection to Skype for a second and lost the call.
That's all right.
What were you saying about immersion and kids? I think was the last you said.
Yes. As a child, you really have this innate, this built-in motivation, this built-in desire to make friends and to communicate with your friends and to go to school and learn things. And so I think a lot of people sort of underestimate how much motivation children have.
Right.
And the immersion environment absolutely helps because if you want to do anything, you have to figure out how to communicate it out. So, but I think that immersion as in an adult, I think it may be a little overrated in some cases. Okay. I know there's a lot of people that say, well, if you can't immerse yourself, it's going to take you forever and you're not going to learn anything. But I think that as an adult, we have ways of creating our own motivation outside of we have to eat, we have to find friends, right. We need to find shelter, that kind of stuff. And I think that we inherently can create the kind of motivation that it takes.
All right.
And plus, we can learn based on our other language. And in an immersion environment as a child, you don't really have anything else to base it on. Right. So it takes you 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years before you really start to get, a firm grasp of grammar and a large vocabulary. My 10-year-old son still makes pretty massive grammar mistakes that after 10 years of teaching myself a foreign language, I would never make in a foreign language. So I think there might be a little bit of overestimation of the value of quote unquote learning as a child, and especially immersion. But it does absolutely help. But I don't think that it's necessary, and I don't think it's the be all end all.
Right. And it's hard to emulate that kind of, like you say, motivation, because you're not, no matter where you are in the world, there's always going to be, Google Translate, or there's always going to be some kind of help that means that if you're stuck in a country where you don't have a language in common, then there's always going to be a way out. There's always the shopkeeper's son who might just happen to know English, or you have your phone, or you can call home or whatever. So there's no need for it. But when you're a child, and for me, it was probably not so much with my friends, but it was probably more because we were all speaking Danish together. So there were no. I was living in a small city, so there were definitely no foreign people coming there speaking another language, sadly. But had the video games, and because Danish is such a small language, no video game would be translated, except for maybe the Disney games, the real kids games. And I actually used to hate that anyway, so I just went into the the kind of the football manager things, and the shooters and stuff, and once you just sit down and try to play a video game, you just learn the words somehow. I don't know how it works, and I don't even know how you learn them. I guess you just kind of deduce it. Your brain might be good enough to just deduce it, but I mean, you don't have a dictionary. You just kind of play the game, and suddenly you realize what that word means.
Right.
So that's a really a cool way to do it when you don't have any kind of real life. I say, I mean, the internet now is real life, isn't it? We can call anyone in the world, and I mean, we're indeed having this conversation across a handful of time zones.
Right, definitely. And that actually, when you were talking about Danish just now, hold on. Sorry about that. When you talk about Danish just now, it actually occurred to me that as an English speaker, I have no real concept of what it would be like to grow up knowing as my native language a smaller, lesser known, lesser studied language like that. I think that would be really, really interesting to be in your shoes and kind of look at the world the way that you do, that if you want to communicate or do anything outside of this pretty narrow part of the world, that you really have to expand linguistically. I think that's absolutely fascinating.
But that's why the Scandinavian countries and a lot of European countries who are not that big, they kind of grow into this bilingual countries because they can't live on their own language. If you're in Germany, that's 90 million people, something. A lot of them rely on their own language. France, same thing. Tons of people. Russia, China, all these languages are huge languages because there's so many people. And the people are like, well, I can speak with hundreds of millions of people, so why would I need to learn English, for instance? Of course, it's changing now. I mean, English is almost becoming the lingua franca of the whole world. So, but I guess it's the same with English in America. And, as an American, I'm sure you realize, or at least observe how poor the foreign language learning is in general.
Oh, absolutely. It is very, the whole mindset is, well, I speak English. Everybody speaks English. If I want to travel to Europe, everybody speaks English. Right. If I want to travel to Mexico, everybody speaks English. And it is very much that mindset. I get a lot of really odd glances when I talk about learning Chinese or learning German, or I just get these questions like, well, why in the world would you learn Chinese? You know English, and it's an awful mindset, I think. Yeah. But I think
where does it come from? I asked a few other Americans this, but where does it come from? I haven't found the answer to that yet. Is it because America, obviously its history is very focused on national pride, right? The revolution and the independence. Is that still carrying over, that you kind of feel like, well, English is our language. Learning another language isn't really, shouldn't really do it? Or where does it come from, this idea?
I think that's some of it. And you do, like any place, you have these really steadfast nationalist types who are, you're in America, speak American. But I think really more than anything, if I had to pinpoint where it started, I would say that it probably has to do really with isolation and the way that the United States really, we have a little section that attaches to Mexico there down in the Southwest. And we have Canada up top, which is honestly, it's more English speaking than French speaking.
Right.
So we really don't, as a country, have the need to learn really any other languages.
Right.
Kind of similar to maybe England, who is an island and just decides, where we speak English,
right.
Everybody speaks English. It's good. We're off by ourselves. But, if you come from, Germany or Italy or Spain or any of these countries, I find that so many of them know so many of the languages of the countries surrounding them. And we don't really have that kind of necessity, just given the sheer size of the United States. Mm-hmm. You can live your whole life in the U.S. and pretty much do and see and have and do whatever you want. and I don't think that same situation really exists very many other places. And I think that has a big part of it, because why, unless you're going to China, really, why would you learn Chinese out of necessity? You in the United States, you really wouldn't.
Right. But you still have a lot of immigrants coming in with foreign languages, but then you see them as, they're coming to you, so they should learn your language. You shouldn't learn theirs, I guess, is the attitude.
That is definitely a big mindset. But you also see a lot of immigrants who come here and they try and stop speaking their language. Mm-hmm. And they decide, I want my child to grow up, socially acceptable, and I want him to be an American. So we're going to speak English at home, even if it's broken English.
Right.
And you end up with, I have quite a few friends whose parents came from other countries, immigrated from other countries, and they don't speak, the second generation doesn't speak any of the language. Wow. I have a friend whose father was born and raised in Germany and really refused growing up to talk German at home. And so he's a first generation born in the United States, my friend is, and he doesn't speak any German.
Right.
So,
that's a shame.
Yeah. And so you see that there's not, once these immigrants, a lot of them are coming to America, it seems like they're tending to want so much for their children to be integrated into society that they're just kind of not passing that part of their culture and their heritage along, which is incredibly sad.
Yeah.
I think the one place you don't see that really is Asian immigrants. They have a tendency, even 3, 4, 5 generations in, they still will speak their language at home.
That's great.
Yeah, which is absolutely cool. There's quite a few Cantonese speakers here in the United States, especially in like California and New York.
That basically guarantees that the children grow up bilingual too.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they'll get English no matter what they do, basically. But having the native language at home is a big help in gaining 2 languages, I think.
Oh, definitely.
But I think we've had enough of a history and a mentality lesson here. How about we get into some more practicality, some more learning style thing? And I had one question. You started out with your wife. You were going as a kind of a couples thing, both trying to learn it. I haven't really seen you mention her a lot on the blog in later posts. Did she kind of fall off, or did she follow along as well?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. For a while, we learned together. She didn't quite take to it like I did. Okay. Just as far as enthusiasm goes, she stuck with me for probably the first 6 months or so.
Okay.
Kind of got frustrated because I think she felt like I was kind of moving ahead of her too fast. And I know that can certainly be frustrating. The funny thing is that I spoke enough German after that and talked to her about it and blogged about it and studied and did everything else that she actually speaks fairly okay German at this point. She certainly can understand a lot of what I say when I talk to her in German, even if she can't deliver a lot of it back.
It sounds like a win.
Yeah, it's kind of goes to contribute to that whole immersion theory. She wasn't really studying, but she heard enough from me, and she got enough, and she had enough foundation in the basics, certainly, that I think it was good experience for both of us.
But you say good experience. Is it something that you can recommend going into it if you're a husband and wife team, or maybe a boyfriend and girlfriend, that you go into language learning together? Or do you think that independent is probably more advantageous?
There's really pros and cons to both. I think that it's very encouraging to have another person with you who maybe one day, if you're kind of lagging, can give you some of their enthusiasm, and vice versa. So as far as motivation goes, and motivation is my number one, you can't do anything without motivation. So as far as motivation goes, I think that it's a big win for both, and I would absolutely recommend it. The one thing you have to be careful of is, and I've seen this happen with other language learners, people who've started together, a husband and wife kind of thing, where they don't really get a concept down, so they start speaking to each other in incorrect language, and so they fossilize this sort of bizarro pidgin language.
Wow, yeah.
So they can speak to each other, but when they finally go and find natives, they're like, wait, what?
That's
going on
really interesting. I never even thought of that, but you're so right. If you're learning the exact same mistakes, so to speak, and you both think they're right, then you can definitely create your own language, and that would be pretty bad.
Yeah, absolutely. You could start find a verb that you think means one thing in English, and you just use it the same way we would in English for every situation, and all of a sudden you're saying something totally off the wall. And I think that when you learn with somebody, you have a less of a tendency to go out and seek native speakers, or to get like private tutoring or that kind of thing, because you're like, oh, well, I get all this speech conversation with this language practice with this other person. Right. So I think that just might be something you want to watch out for if you are going to learn with a partner.
That's a top tip, I would say. So you talked about motivation, how it was important to you, and I've seen a lot of your blog posts on the subject, and also other bloggers have also written about it. And I must say it's one of the things that I struggle with the most. And maybe you just want to take a moment to describe how you when you're in the motivation hell, you're in the dumps, you can't find the motivation to do work. How do you motivate yourself in general?
Well, that's a good question. I don't tend to get demotivated a whole lot, just because I really love anything to do with languages, even if it's not something that I'm studying. And I think a lot of times it'll be with a specific language that I'll get frustrated and kind of lose motivation on. And so when I do that, I know, you know what, let's put this aside for a little while and either do something not language related, just to kind of get my mind free. Or a lot of times what I find is if I just surf around the internet and read some language blogs or read some articles on, an endangered language, or about, French orthography, or something bizarre that has nothing to do with the other language that I'm learning, it can kind of get me excited about languages in general.
Right.
And especially reading other people's success stories, and even going on Facebook and seeing, most of my Facebook timeline is in other languages, because I have friends in all these, even languages I don't speak for some reason. and I'll just be like, you know what, one day I'm going to be able to read all of this, and I'm going to be able to, I won't have to look up any of these words or doing this. And that's real motivating for me, to be able to communicate with all these people that at this point I really can't.
Right.
And just seeing that full circle kind of end result there usually will bring me back to, you know what, I'm ready to get moving back on Chinese. And sometimes you just need a break.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need a couple days to say, you know what, I'm going to let all this just brush off me. Maybe I'll forget a few things, but if it means that I'll be more focused and more motivated later, then it's totally worth relearning that stuff.
Of course. Yeah. No problem. And
if it lasts too long, truthfully, if I'm angry at Chinese for, you know, a couple of days off doesn't do it, and reading other articles doesn't do it, and thinking about knowing Chinese at some point doesn't do it, and you know, a couple more weeks go by, maybe Chinese just isn't.
You're not feeling it.
Yeah, if I can't get that motivation back, then it may be at some point time to shelve that. I did that with Cantonese.
Right. Or maybe, I mean, maybe before you ditch it completely, maybe you should do a bit of a, you know, soul searching, maybe try to find out why you started learning in the first place, try to reinvent the motivation, because sometimes I feel like people, and this is, I guess this is a criticism, but, you know, I genuinely see this person on Facebook like every other day. I see some people asking, what language should I learn? And it's like, you know, there are objective ways to answer that question, but I don't think it's very productive for your motivation. Like, it's like, yeah, you should learn Spanish because there's like this many speakers, or you should learn Russian because they're taking over the world, or you should learn Chinese because this and that. You know, there are objective reasonings, but they just don't work for me. I mean, how's it going to give me motivation that there's this many speakers? I'd rather be motivated by Russian because I play a video game that has like hundreds of millions of people playing it, and only in Russian. And there's a huge Russian community associated with it. That's motivation. It's not motivation to ask somebody else what you should do, I feel like.
Absolutely. And it's funny you'd mention that, because as far as I'm concerned, if you have to go onto a forum and ask what language should I learn, right, you're probably not ready to learn a language yet. And it's not a criticism to that person, but it's you should know when you're ready to learn a language and you really feel like you have the motivation to go through it, because it is a big process. Yeah. It's not something small. It is a large commitment.
Exactly.
And if you are sitting there trying to figure out which one, or, you know, what should I, you don't have the motivation to do it.
Right.
I tell you right now, you're not going to, unless you say, oh, well, I'll try this, and you absolutely fall in love with the language, which sometimes happens, but I mean, not necessarily always. But I think that those kind of people really like the idea of knowing another language, but they haven't found that thing, that thing that triggers you. Yeah.
Right.
And I know it when I catch it.
Yeah.
It's there. It's I mean, that's all I can think about, and I kind of obsess over that kind of stuff. So I couldn't imagine myself ever going on a forum and saying, you know, what language should I learn? And even worse than that, actually, is the ones that go on and say, well, what's the easiest language to learn?
Yeah.
Well, come on, really? You're just trying to figure out what the easiest language to learn is?
Add one, man. Add one.
Yeah, there's no motivation there. So they just want to be able to speak something to their friends who don't know any better.
Right.
Yeah. Usually,
and
that is.
I mean, if you want to learn an easy language, yeah, I don't even see how you would come up with that reasoning anyway. It's like you're just trying to add numbers or something. But of course, there's a lot of. I mean, could you call it a little bit of pragmatism? You know, it's about showing off your numbers, and it's about doing it the fastest, and all these annoying things that are distorting the reality. Because, I mean, in reality, a normal person, you know, they don't learn a language in 3 months. They just don't. You know, they don't even get fluent in 3 months. You know, some people have mastered techniques and ways to become fluent in a language incredibly quick. But that doesn't mean that you as a new learner can just jump in and just do the same, because I was ambitious, but I started the blog and I've been reading all these amazing blogs. I also read yours eventually. I hadn't seen it, but then you sent it to me and I was like, man, there's like 2.5 years of posts here. You're like, yeah, I've been doing it for a while. So I can definitely recommend that, by the way. But I'm really starting to realize that it's about putting in the consistent effort and not giving a damn about what everyone else is doing, you know? You have
Absolutely.
the same experience in where, you see people, how can I learn this language in 3 months and stuff? And then they give up after a week or something, you know?
Yeah, because the progress doesn't come fast enough for them. And that's it. I think that a lot of people have read a lot of things online that are kind of misleading, because every program promises, speak with natives and fluently in 10 minutes a day.
Right.
You're like, wow, really? That's great. And it's nothing like that. It really is. It is kind of similar to, okay, I'm going to learn this new language. It's kind of like, well, I'm going to start college. It is an intense and a very long journey, and really it never ends.
Yeah.
And I think people are convinced that, okay, I buy this book, 10 minutes a day, 2 or 3 months from now, I'm going to be able to speak this language. And they don't. Right. And they don't even come close. And they're like, well, it's too hard. I'm just not good at this.
Right. And that's also why I really like your blog, because you're realistic, I feel like. And you also said it a few moments ago. You said that it's a journey, you take it easy. And I don't know how long you took to learn German, but was it about a year or something where you considered yourself, okay, now I'm pretty fluent in this?
Yeah, it was a 1-year mission. And I studied 2 to 3 hours a day religiously every day.
That is a lot of hours too.
Yeah, it is. And I put everything I had into it. And I ended up going to a German meetup group to kind of test myself, and was able to carry on good conversations for a couple hours with people. And they understood me, I understood them. And that's really where I wanted to be.
Must have felt good.
So, it felt great. But it never stops. I mean, I'm substantially better at German now than I was then. A year and a half after I thought I was fluent. And so it really is constant. Yeah. I learn new stuff every day. I read for half an hour to an hour German books.
Amazing.
Usually it's like science fiction novels or krimis or something. But I learn new vocab every day, new sentence structures all the time. So it never stops.
I think that's a really good point as well, because a lot of people, I mean, we're all talking about learning a language. We're not really talking about continuing to learn a language once we've decided that we're fluent enough to call it learned. But I mean, that is important, isn't it? If you don't do any German, I mean, how are you going to stick to German in America, let alone Denmark or anywhere? You're just going to slowly forget it. Of course, it's in there somewhere. I did German for like 10, 12 years in school, and I had a pretty good German. Then I didn't do it for 5 or 6 years or so. And I can feel that my German is very lacking now. But of course, the vocabulary is still in there somewhere. It's like, I think it's like riding a bike that, it's the wheel, the way to ride the bike is always there, but you need to get back into it. And that's just not necessary if you just keep it up like you do, do a little bit every day, or I guess even a little bit every week is enough to kind of keep the level high enough. I mean, speak some.
Absolutely. And I do, I've a German language meetup group that meets twice a month that I try and go to. So I get some spoken practice too. And yeah, without that, I'd probably barely be able to speak German right now. That's for sure.
Well, I'm sure you're good at it. It's a hard language. It's a language with very advanced grammar. I mean, at least so most people would say. I definitely agree. Do you think that having learned German as kind of your first major self-study, is that helping your new languages that you're starting to pick up?
I think so. I think that it would help. It doesn't really matter with Mandarin, because there's hardly any grammar to it, to be honest. But I think that when I go, one of my next moves, probably in another year or so, I'd really like to get into a Slavic language. Mm-hmm. And I think that the German piece, especially with cases and things like that, will really help kind of understand what those concepts are. Cases took me a little while to really figure out what they were for.
Right.
But now that I have that, I think that moving into something with, even bigger grammar, I think would definitely be an advantage to knowing German first than to just jump into it with what we know from English or Romance language.
Right. If you, I always ask this every week, so you've probably heard it, but if you had to learn a new language starting tomorrow, how would you do it? What kind of resources and materials would you kind of go to first? What's been your experience so far to be most effective?
Really, my go-to right off the bat is Pimsleur. Mm-hmm. Really, just more for pronunciation than anything else. It's not going to teach you much in the way of any kind of vocabulary, and there's not much in the way of really direct grammar or anything. But I find that the languages that I started Pimsleur with, my pronunciation is much better in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I think that the working on pronunciation in the beginning is definitely a big deal. I think that it's much easier to focus for a long time on correct pronunciation in the beginning mm-hmm. than it is to correct bad pronunciation later.
Right.
And so you may start off a little slower, but I think in the long run, it's the way to go. I would also probably, I like Assimil okay, but I don't love it. If there's a Michelle Thomas course, I definitely go with that.
Love the Michelle Thomas.
Yes, definitely. The new Teach Yourself Complete books are mostly good. There's some really bad ones, but there's also some really, really good ones that I found. The one for Mandarin is really good. And the one for Czech that I haven't really learned any Czech, but I've kind of looked through it and it looks pretty good. Didn't really love the Persian one.
Right.
But I've also really liked the Living Language series, the new ones.
Yeah, I saw that for Russian, actually. My only problem was that, and I guess this goes for some of the others as well, is that they're kind of audio and text, so you kind of need to find a working environment where you can read and listen.
Right.
And I feel like Pimsleur and Michelle Thomas are great because you can kind of, run around, or you can go jog, or you can sit on the couch or whatever, just kind of do it in a relaxed way. Whereas I kind of worried that when I do the Assimils or the Living Language, it kind of feels a bit like school. And I don't think that's good for my, I know it's not school. It's something I picked, of course, but it just really feels like I'm sitting down in a classroom all over again.
I could definitely see that. What I kind of like to do is I like to schedule sort of what I call desk time.
Okay, yeah.
And then audio time. I like to listen to Pimsleur and Michelle Thomas when I go for a walk, or when I'm commuting, or if I'm going to pick the kids up from school, that kind of thing. And then when I'm home and sitting down, and that's when I think it's good to have that one book and audio that you can kind of sit down and sort of like really feel and see your progress. And it is, I imagine it would be very similar to school. Fortunately, I've been out of school for a long time. So 20 years now. So for me, that maybe doesn't have the same sort of negative connotation as might somebody who's in school or recently out of school. So
when you got these materials, do you set when you set desk time and audio time, are they kind of strict for you? Do you set a schedule, or are they kind of loose? So you say, I should do a little bit of this and a little bit of that?
I really, in the beginning, I like to schedule time more than anything. And it may not be I'm going to do this for, between noon and 2 o'clock. It may be something like, all right, by the end of this week, I want to be through these 3 discs.
Right.
And so kind of figure out, okay, I need to listen for, an hour and a half each day. So I kind of try it in my head, sort out that, where I get an hour and a half of time. So it's sort of like macro scheduling. I don't really like to map out exactly like by the minute what I do this particular day, but I definitely like to have a study plan, and I like to have goals that I can actually reach.
Right.
did a blog post about that not too long ago. And it really, to me, mini goals are the thing that keep you moving. If you want to say, okay, in a year, I'm going to speak fluent German. Okay, well, a year's a long time, and it's a long time to keep up motivation for that. But if you say, in 3 months, I want to finish all 3 levels of Pimsleur. Okay, it's a little bit easier now.
Right.
You have a concrete, okay, in 90 days, I can focus on this. Or better yet, in this week, I want to do 7 lessons of ASIMO. Okay, that's manageable. I can focus on this for 7 days. And then you do it again for another 7 days. And before you know it, a year's gone by and you speak German.
And you've done a ton, yeah.
Right.
How do you move above the kind of the basic, I guess you can call it a tourist level you get from the Pimsleur and the ASIMO? You can speak a little bit, but as far as holding a whole conversation, is this a little bit off? How do you progress above that initial fluency there?
Well, I'm really big on I want to speak the way that it's spoken in that particular country. I'm really big on colloquialisms and things like that, idioms. So I will do a lot of research as far as to kind of figure out what kinds of things would go on in a casual conversation.
Okay.
I think that podcasts are really good for that, exclusively in the other language podcasts. There's a lot of websites and stuff that have idioms and slang that may or may not apply. It's something you can certainly ask a native speaker about, but I usually collect a notebook. I start a notebook when I start a language.
Okay, yeah.
And I tend to write down things that I say in conversation. Things like, that's great, or I'll be back tomorrow,
right.
Or hey, how's it going? Or, things like that little interjections or bits of and pieces that I think that people normally use instead of, where is your restroom? May I see your menu?
Right. I
would like to check, please. I'm never going to say any of that stuff. I'm really not. I don't even really bother learning a lot of that stuff. And I actually find that I tend to steer away from a lot of what most people would call the basics in the beginning. Colors aren't a big, I'm colorblind anyway, so I don't really talk about colors, but colors aren't a big thing for me to learn. I don't really learn animal names.
No, that's stupid anyway.
Things like that. I mean, like, when am I ever going to go out and ask somebody, where's the purple giraffe? I'm not. So I tend to, a lot of the kindergarten basics, the things you see taught on YouTube, first thing, let's sing the animal song. I tend not to learn those things right off the bat. Eventually, if it's important enough, it'll come up in conversation enough that I'll get it.
Of course.
But it's I want to get to the point where I can have conversations with people like I would have with my friends.
So it sounds like you have a very kind of, let's call it a very mechanical way of kind of, you disaggregate, you pulling apart your own sentences and kind of translating them to your target language. So you kind of have this structured approach to probably intermediate to advanced fluency. Is that a correct observation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say so.
Great.
I definitely go out and purposefully learn words and phrases that I'm going to use.
So you just write phrases down and then put them into Anki or a similar program and then run them enough so you know them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yep, and I make sure they're checked by native speakers like on Lang8, or I use italki for tutoring, Skype tutoring quite a bit.
Right. You have a speaking tutor or just for the writing?
I have a speaking tutor for Chinese that I try and see once or twice a week.
And how are you finding that experience?
Fantastic.
Awesome.
She is wonderful. I've gone through I think I've tried about 9 or 10 different ones, and I settled on one that is absolutely wonderful. And I'm going to do a blog post at some point about how to best take advantage of a tutoring session,
right?
And how to pick the right tutor for you.
Yeah, what do you look for anyway? I mean, I think I've been looking for one for Russian actually, but I've been resistant to jump the gun on it because you can see people's video introduction if they're a good tutor, and the professional tutors have certificates uploaded, but I just can't find one based on it's not that I can't find one. I just can't select one out of all the available tutors. So did you have any kind of things you were going for when you were looking for a tutor?
Truthfully, I started out I scheduled a half an hour lesson with like 5 or 6 different tutors, like one in the morning, one in the evening for a couple days in a row.
Right.
And just tried them out and really just kind of talked to them about what their expectations were, where my level was, kind of see. You can find out a lot from somebody on how they find out what level you're at. I had one who started running me through basically a checklist. And I'm like, okay, well, this is way too formal.
Right.
So, and then I had the one that I really like was, she's like, well, what do you want out of this? You know, and so we kind of map some things out. And what she does for me now is she will bring a concept. Like last week it was movies.
Uh-huh.
So we talk about going to the movies. We talked about action movies. We talked about actors. We talked about sitting in the front row. We talked about, you know, anything and everything having to do with movies.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And it was phenomenal. It just gave me this whole, like, tons of vocabulary and all these sentence structures that I could piece together. And I learned more in that hour than I would have self-studying for 2 hours.
And then you take some of the words out and put it into your flashcards, or how do you process a lesson like that?
Yeah, usually the words I'll put in through sentences. I like to do. I really only like to do Anki incomplete sentences.
Okay.
So I do a lot of substitution type cards, where, you know, I go to the bank, I go to the movies,
right,
I go to the park, and so I'm learning only one vocabulary word, but in the meantime, it's drilling this sentence structure like crazy.
Right.
So you're getting kind of, I think that's sort of a 2 birds, 1 stone kind of thing.
It sounds highly effective as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent.
So,
well,
and
I think we're about to run out of time, but just before we leave this conversation, if you could take, let's say three top tips that aspiring language learners, if maybe they're new to learning a language, or maybe they're not, you know, that good, they're new to it. What would be your top 3 tips if you had to succeed at learning a new foreign language?
Okay. I would say listen from the beginning, listen as much as you can. I have found my biggest weakness in every language has always been understanding native speech.
Right.
So I would advise, even when it doesn't make any sense to you, if you're just hearing gibberish, what some people would call background listening, in the beginning is good for parsing words, and it's good for getting a feel of the language, the prosody of the language, and a lot of people really skip that step, and I find that the more I listen early on, the easier it is to understand later. So listen. Right. Listen.
Is that all 3 of them, or do you have 2 others?
I have 2 others.
Okay, great.
That's a big one. Number 2, I would say, make sure that you set goals for that language. Basically, what do you want to do with that language? Like I did with Chinese. I want to learn Mandarin, but I don't need to learn how to read it or write it right now. So my goal is speech and listening. I know that from the beginning, so I know what to concentrate on the most. So I think that a lot of people are just like, okay, I want to learn this language, and they don't sit there and really map out, well, what do you want to do with the language? Do you want to be able to read classics? In that case, don't worry about speaking as much. Just concentrate on reading. Or if you want to do all 4, then make sure that you schedule enough time for all 4, but make sure you know what your priorities are.
Right.
I'd say it's number 2.
Learning, yeah.
Yeah. Number 3 is basically get started. I see so many people collecting resources. I wrote a blog post about this too. You collect resources and you collect more resources and you start learning about new techniques and you learn about new courses and new methods. And before you know it, 3 months have gone by and you haven't actually learned hello yet. So get started.
I think they call this the information overload, where people are just constantly trying to search for information on how to do things instead of just doing it.
Yes.
So that would be your top 3 in terms of top tips. And of course, people are more than welcome, I assume, to go on to howtolanguages.com and read any of the aforementioned blog posts or any of those we haven't mentioned. And
absolutely.
I just want to say thank you, Bill, for coming on. It's been a real pleasure, and I really enjoyed talking to you and reading your blog. I feel like we share a lot of similarities in kind of the style we employ when learning a language.
Absolutely. Hey, the pleasure's all mine, Chris.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. For more information, be sure to check out actualfluency.com. Until next time, enjoy learning and have a great day.